Okay, this is Mike Leahy. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about having a more successful physical inventory. Bart Fannin, for those of you who may not know Bart, he's our operations manager, and Bart will be helping me today. I have emailed to everybody two checklists, one for Macola progression and one for Macola ES/10. So for today's purposes, we'll be able to, in this PowerPoint, we'll be able to see both screens. The screenshots pretty much are identical. They just look a little different. But for those who are not familiar with us, for those who are not familiar with us, we've been in business forever. We have worked with Macola forever. We are Macola experts, as well as being synergy experts. We specialize only in manufacturing and distribution. We're located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and what we do for a living is we help people make better use of their Macola software investment. That's what we do. Okay, so we're going to add some humor to today. So this is typical enthusiasm for the annual physical inventory. So hopefully those of you in the audience are thinking a little bit more about that than these pictures here. But I thought we would add some humor to what we're going through. Okay. So what we're going to do today is there's two things. So you have the checklist, and we're going to go over certain areas. You know, everybody can read the checklist, but what we're going to go through is where the pain points are, where mistakes can be made. And if you look on your checklist that I've sent you, you'll see certain areas that are bolded. You'll see certain areas that are not only bolded, but they're all caps. And what those are about, those are areas where people have gone before you and made mistakes. And the worst thing that can happen is you create your physical inventory batch, and then 2 days later, you're in the middle of keying in and counting, and you set the batch up wrong. So this is something where everybody needs to go slowly, and you need to practice. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So step by step, and I have been. I'll tell you one of my stories is it's the day after Christmas or something like that, maybe 2 days after Christmas, and it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm working at a customer where they hired 25 temps to count. They had this huge repair and maintenance area to count. And the lady who was the department manager didn't show up. She'd been on a cruise. She got sick on the cruise. She couldn't get a hold of anybody. That was before cell phones. So I conducted the whole physical inventory myself. And I've done it several times since then. I've helped people do it since then. So I know where the pains are and the problems and doing things as well. So let's talk about this step by step. We need to plan out who and how things are going to be counted. That includes the staff. There may be items that need to be pre-counted. There may be items that need to be double counted or triple counted, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We developed a report and dashboard. One of the observations that I had working with this one customer especially is that every year they had a handful of parts that caused problems. And the idea was if we knew ahead of time what those handful of items are, we could pre-count them, we could double count them, we could do it, we could make sure that those are being avoided. So I'll come back to that, but we have a report for those of you who are using our Pulse dashboard software. We have a report in there that allows you to say, okay, I'm going to take the last 3 years worth of physical inventory counting, and I'm going to look for all items that had more than, say, a 90% either count variance, quantity variance, or 90% dollar variance. And it lists those items, and that's your list. That's your list of items that need to be pre-counted and double counted. Okay. So the next step that happens is you create a Macola tag file. You go through the counting, you review your variances, and then you do your recounting. Now, one of the philosophies that I have that I want to introduce is that what some companies do is they wait until 5 o'clock, the staff is like out the door, and then they're going to do their variances the next morning, or they're going to do their variances late in the afternoon. So what I have found is that the recounting really needs to start almost immediately after the counting started. And I'll give you an example. If you had a frozen quantity of 1,000 and it came in with a count of 400, or it came in with a count of 40, there's no reason why you can't recount that immediately while the associate is there in that aisle or in that section. You know, it's, hey, Bill, hey, Mary, what's the deal here? You know, we're looking for 1,000. You only put in 40. And so that person then, before they go home, before they've off to do something else. So the idea is, my philosophy, and we have reports in Dashboard that start pinpointing where the variances are, either the dollar variances. You can sort it descending by dollar variance or quantity variance and do your recounting immediately. Another philosophy that I have is that nobody goes home until we finish counting. So it's not like, well, Bill has this section, you know, by 2 o'clock he finishes, he takes off and leaves, or Mary waits until, you know, she picks the easy one to count, and she leaves at 4:30. So the philosophy that I've seen that works best is nobody goes home until everything is counted and recounted, and therefore you have a lot more team spirit, where if somebody's getting bogged down with sections that are hard to count or items that are hard to count, they get a helping hand from those who are waiting to go home. And then when everything is counted, everything has been reconciled, then you post the tag file. So that's kind of the overview with some of my, my 2 cents worth. Okay, practice. Physical inventories are only done typically for most companies once a year, possibly twice a year, and people forget how it works. Maybe they've never had a checklist. So what we say is to create a test database and practice in the database. And therefore you get familiar with going through the checklist, going through each of the steps. Okay, the next thing you have to make a decision on is, are you going to use actual tags? We'll call them 2-part tags, where you're leaving one part on the shelf or on the bin or taped to the item, or are you going to use count sheets? And by count sheets means that we've taken our tag file, exported it to Excel, sorted it down by bin and row or section, something that makes sense, and then we hand out 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that maybe have 40 or 50 items on it, and then they turn those in. So it makes a big difference in how you're going to do this. A mistake that some people make is they say, well, we'll just use the same tag numbers as we used last year. We ordered them from whoever, and so they order them, and that is, technically you can get that to work, but in order to do that, you have to destroy your tag file from last year. You have to destroy your history of counting. So you have to start your new tag number with a new number. You can't use last year's. Okay, avoid file locking. Okay, so let's say that you have 6 or 8 people who are keying in tags, and Bill decides to go take a smoke break and leaves his workstation running, and what he's effectively doing is he's locking the last record that he was using. So if you're going to have people simultaneously keying in, it'd be best to key in sections of tag numbers that don't overlap one another. It's the overlapping that causes the file locking. Okay, something else that happens is Macola does not handle negative on-hand quantities. The concept of Macola is it wants to freeze the inventory. That's kind of a bad word. It just makes a snapshot. So let's say we have 100 today, and we counted 80, which means we had a 20. We had a 100 minus 80 equals 20. We had a 20 unit variance. Well, if our starting quantity was a negative 100, and we had counted 80, Macola doesn't know what to do, so it takes minus 100 minus 80 and ends up with a variance of 180. So at a minimum, all of the negative on hands quantities need to be set to 0. Something else that happens is you may have items that have a unit cost of 0. Well, it's pretty rare to have items in the inventory at 0. So what happens then is, in my example a minute ago, Macola takes counted 100, or had a frozen of 100, counted 80. That gave us a variance of 20. And we now take that 20 and multiply it times our unit cost. Well, if our unit cost is 0, it's not going to work. Macola doesn't know how to handle that. The other thing to be doing is to have very, very strict cutoffs. We're not going to slip in and do purchase order receiving in the middle of our physical inventory, or we're not going to be reporting production from the day before that we forgot to report. We have to have a clean cutoff. So this is an example here of the Pulse Dashboard exceptions report, which would show you items with no cost, items with negative on-hand quantity. And then this is the screen for those of you who have dashboard that shows the physical inventory prior variances, where you're gonna double or triple count. Okay. So now we're gonna be going faster. We freeze the inventory. Bad word. It just means we make a copy of the on-hand quantity as of this date and time, and it puts it in a special place that no one can see it, so it can remember it to be used later. And you're doing that by location. And it's especially important that the date here, the freeze date, is today's date, not a month ago's date or something like that. Okay. Now we're going to generate the tag file. Okay. This is where the big problems occur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift over to this is our checklist that you all got a copy of. And we've gone through some of these already. Here's the freezing of the, okay, so here we are in section 4, run the physical inventory, physical count selection program. And it says, first of all, this step must be run immediately after freezing the inventory. Therefore, everything is you have a clean cutoff. And look at all these data, these pieces of data. All this stuff has to be dealt with. This concept, I'll come back to this in a minute, creating a physical count with or without item numbers. So there's a whole bunch of decisions that need to be made. This is the absolute most critical part. If you mess this up, or if you for example, if you accidentally don't read this and you check this box, this makes a huge difference in the way that it processes things. Another part here is you want to include 0 on-hand quantities, yes or no. You want to exclude negatives. Well, exclude negatives. This is the person who designed this was on drugs or something. You would never want to exclude any items from being counted. The worst that would happen is your variance would be wrong. Okay, and the number of extra tags becomes another issue in that, and what this means is that if you had 5,000 items to count and they all had their nice little bins or the nice little cubby hole or the nice little slot, that would be easy. But if you have 7 overflow locations and you have a whole bunch of boxes broken open, and some people are and they're thrown to the side, and at the last minute you find them and you want to count them, this is where you're going to need the extra tags. So it does not hurt at all to have way too many extra tags. It's disastrous if you don't have enough tags, which means that you're doing multiple counts on the same tag number, which you're just damaging the integrity of your counting. So again, this is something you want to practice. This is something that is tedious. This down here, create physical counts without tag numbers. Well, what does that mean? Well, you have to read this, and it explains. So today's not the day. We could talk about just this one checkbox for half an hour, but the idea is that you should be reading this and practicing. At the top up here, we have our phone number. If you feel like we can help you walk through some of this together, that would be good. But this is the most critical piece, this running, creating this, what we call this is the tag file. Okay, well, let's go back to where we were a second ago. So not to belabor this, but this is the most critical part. Everything that happens after this depends on what you do here. Now, I should mention also that you literally can be using tags and then having them turned in and keying them in one by one, keying. That can get to be a little bit tedious. What other people are doing is they are exporting it to Excel, and then they are handing out count sheets, and then people write down on the count sheets, and then they end up updating Excel, and then they want to import that Excel file. Instead of keying them in one by one, they want to import this Excel file. So if your company does that, we do have the technology to seamlessly import that tag file for you. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next step. You've heard me talk enough about this is extremely important. This is the physical count selection program. This is the ES screen. This is the Macola progression screen, so you see that. Okay, so here we have happy people who are counting. So the person on the left, or the team on the left, they have nice Weiss's barcode scanners, and nothing gets written down. It gets pushed into Macola real time. The variance calculations are done real time. So if you're using the Weiss's software and have invested in these $3,000 scanners right here, these Motorola scanners, you should be using them. The big payoff will be to use the scanners for the physical inventory. Here, she's counting and he's writing down. So there's just two different ways of doing it. So you have to make a decision. Okay. So now let's assume that we have manually keyed in all of our tags. We have or scanned in all the tags. Everything's in there. And now we're going to go to the next level. And this is the program here. This is the screen that I talked about earlier, where if you're going to have multiple people keying in, then give them tags that give them a range of tags that do not overlap each other. Or if people are taking breaks, to exit out of this program so they're not locking up the next tag. Because what happens is you key in a tag number 1, you key it in, press enter, it automatically populates this up here for tag number 2. You key it in the quantity, press enter, this is 3. So, but if 3 is in Mary's batch, in another workstation, it's going to lock that up. Okay, where are we here? Whoop. Well, something is causing this to well, I can't get down to that. Yeah, well, we'll just go this way. So we've talked about this screen here. So now we want to reconcile our counts. So the things that are going to happen is you're going to have items that you did not count. So Macola created a tag, but you never keyed in a quantity. It's kind of like the same as the uncounted. Well, the missing tags may be that they never turned. They never turned the tag back in. So you don't know if it's lost, if it got torn up, if it got under a pallet or something. So then you have uncounted items. You're having to deal with variance analysis. In dashboard, these are the reports that I talked about before. And I'll go back over here for a second in dashboard. This is the exceptions report that we talked about earlier. This is our prior year variances, and this is keeping track of our physical inventory counts. So for example, the way that I would approach this was showing you, for example, the frozen quantity and the counted quantity. And then this is the difference. So if you were to be using this, you can sort this down either ascending or descending, or you can take the dollar variance and sort that down ascending or descending. And you're going to have positive variances and you're going to have negative. And that this report then can be used to immediately, this is the report where I mentioned before, where you have 1,000 frozen and the worker only counted 40. And there's no reason why you can't have a team that's a separate counting, a double counting team that is investigating these. So this is the real time. And if you're using the WISA software, this is even easier. This is like super real time. Okay. And while we're here, let's talk about this. This is the variance report, but it's a different variation. It's showing you also items that did not get counted. And there's some flaws in the Macola count report that there's no count report for items not counted prior to posting. You have to post and then it shows you, which of course doesn't make any sense, because you need to know what didn't get counted before you post. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. This reconciling, I worked, another little story here. I worked with this one company. They took days. They were taking 1 cent washers and they were arguing about what the count was, and they would reconcile this and just belabor it for days, like a week and a half. Then the company was sold, and they sold it to Honeywell, and Honeywell is really, they are really, really good on inventory control. Honeywell gave them 12 hours. Okay, you finish counting. It basically was 8 o'clock the next morning. You have to turn your variances and your counts in. And were they able to do it? Yes. So the idea being, reconciliation is important, but you need to prioritize and decide how long you're gonna take to reconcile. Okay, so let's go down. This is the pre-post register. So this is another little warning here, in that you have to print the pre-post register. And that's this checkbox down here and the checkbox here. And this allows you to see what Macola's variance is before posting. So it's extremely important for you to know what that number is before you post. And politically, you may have 10 people looking over your shoulder wanting to know what that amount was. If you forget and run this in the excitement of the day and run this without checking this box, you will post your tags and you'll have no pre-post register, and it's a point of which you can't go back. In other words, you've posted it in final and it's over with. So this is extremely important, to print this pre-post register. And now the pre-post register, for those who may be new to this, the pre-post register is not a friendly report. So let's say that at the very, very bottom of the report, it shows you a big variance and then tells you that you have problems. And the problems are for you to find. So if the report is 400 pages long, you have to be very, very patient as you look at it, even look at it on the screen, 1 page at a time, tab, 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 until you get to find what you want, especially if it's allotted items, because sometimes the error messages aren't very clear. Okay, so now we're at the point where we have printed the pre-post. We're done with our reconciling. It's given us the variance dollars. So if you don't like the variance dollars, maybe you're going to go back and do more reconciliation. But the point being that this is the beginning of the end. So let's go on to the next step here. Now we're going to post the tags. And at this time, it's the same exact screen. It just doesn't have the pre-post register. I should have had this unchecked. And my suggestion here is that you want to print the frozen stock status report, because you need to know ahead of time and after it's been posted what that report looks like. Okay, so let's go on to the next one here. Errors that may occur. So let's go back to our checklist for a minute. So let's just kind of review what this chart up here is really, I think, is really nice. I developed this. This shows you that you're freezing the inventory, you're creating the tag file, you're counting, you're keying in the quantities or scanning them in, you're posting your adjustments, and then this is the time now to talk about what you should have done better. That we'll come back to that. So there's this practice. I can't stress enough. Practice, and practice in your test company. So we're freezing the inventory. We talked about that. This step number 4 is the one with all of these questions. This is extremely important that you read this multiple times. Call us if you have questions. Remember that the items that are in bold are where people have gone before you and made mistakes. You have to make the decision whether you're going to use actual tags or you're going to use count worksheets. And if you do use count worksheets in Excel, then we can import them into Macola. Here you're doing your counts and your recounts. We talked about that. This is a question that comes up is, well, when can we resume our inventory activity? So at a point in time that we have keyed in and we're settled down, we're not going to be doing any more counting. At that point, inventory can resume. But I should mention also that it's going to be important. This is what happens sometimes: is Bill or Mary back in receiving on the morning of the physical inventory, they find a whole bunch of packing slips that never got keyed in the day before. So in other words, you don't have a clean cutoff. They forgot to key these in. The boxes went into, but they didn't key them in. So they're trying to slip this in. And the same thing with the production reporting. We forgot to report on these 10 production orders. So let's slip it in and see if no one will notice. Well, that's why it's so important to shut down those areas, and that cannot happen. Okay, we talked about scanning in. We talked about reconciling, and reconciling is an 80-20. You can take forever, but the majority of it is going to be in the first 12 hours. Here we're printing the stock status report again, the frozen stock status report. Here's our PrePost Register. So you're seeing here there's more bold stuff, there's more yellow highlighted stuff. And now we're posting the tags. And there's some things that we don't need to talk about today, but there's some other caveats here that you need to talk about. If you activated this, do this. If you did not activate it, it's gonna have a different kind of result. Okay, so now we're back to where we were on this chart a minute ago, errors that may occur. So let's talk about errors that may occur. The most disastrous one that can happen is that you posted your tags with the wrong date. Somebody went in and changed, let's say that you froze the batch on December 9th, but you posted it for December 10th. That is disastrous. And that's why along the way we say do a screen print. Back here, before the screen here back on step 4, where we're creating the batch, make a screenshot of this, so that if something goes wrong, you can talk to somebody. Oh, well, what did you put in here for extra tags? Oh, I put in 1 million. Well, it didn't create any extra tags. In other words, you can't defend what exactly. So if you make a screenshot of this and something goes wrong, we can help you rather than trying to guess or trying to convince you that it didn't get keyed in right. Okay, so let's go back to our. So this posting date has to be the same as the freeze date. Okay. If you did not count all the items, there's nothing you can do. You just have to go in and probably the next day make manual inventory adjustments to compensate for that. But it's not going to be in the journal entry that's created, the journal entries that are created for the variance. It will not be in there. Okay, this is another thing that happens is Mary comes up and she says, I have this part number called 123, and it's not on the list. In other words, we're trying to count items that are not in Macola. And again, that's something that is nothing you can do about that except key it into Macola, create it in Macola, and then have a manual inventory adjustment later. Forgetting to post the tags is something else. You would think that with all the work and the energy that goes in, that somebody would forget, because you're doing that pre-post, but it definitely happens. And then the other error that can occur is not having enough extra tags. And when that happens, you're having to double up your counts on single tags. And let me go back here to our checklist here. Yeah, that pretty much is. I covered all where there can be errors, but you can't beat yourself up. There are always going to be items that are out on the shelf that didn't get put into Macola properly, and there are always going to be items that did not get counted. But one of the things that, if we went back up to our beginning report here, this inventory exceptions, this is what you want to learn from for the next time. Inventory items that did not get counted in the last physical inventory. So 1,426 items, you would say, how can that possibly happen? Did not get counted in the last physical inventory. So that's what this report shows you that. Okay. So let's go back to where we were a second ago. Okay, with all of this, the work that goes into this is what you want it to look like. You want to have people be very happy and proud of themselves when this is done. And a successful inventory does not, the dollar variance is not indicative of whether you were successful or not. Having accurate counts and reconciling quickly, I think those are the bigger questions, or the bigger criteria. So Bart, I've been talking here. To have questions come in, or do you have any questions that need to be addressed?
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone to use the questions area. Feel free to type anything in. Don't be shy. Odds are, if you're asking it, a couple others would like to hear the same. So one question is, Mike, if they're in the middle of running this on a particular day and time and they need some help, is anyone from Lay Consulting available?
Yes, it would be ideal if you're thinking you might need some help, would be to contact us in advance, especially if the calls are going to come in on Saturday or Sunday. I had a call. I was on vacation last week, and on Sunday afternoon, I had a call from a customer who something happened, and that's step 4 where you're creating the batch that froze up, and somebody had to dial in and fix that. So it'd be better to give us some advance notice.
Okay, thank you.
And for those of you who are using Pulse Dashboard, again, in the summary, I'm in the inventory module, I'm in summary, and this box here, this box will be on everybody's desktop. So this is a standard report that comes with it. And then this physical inventory, I think I'm in the wrong place. This came with it. Then the next one is this cycle physical count, and this is where you're looking at your variances real time. And then this is the report that allows you to go back 2 or 3 years. This is what it looks like. You say, I want my cutoff date, let's say it's 3 years or 2 years, and I want to take everything that had a minimum of a 90% variance and display that on the screen. And the idea is to keep bumping this number up until you get comfortable with 10 or 20 items that you want to because you're only doing this once a year, so you can't remember the items that caused problems last year. And then the other one is this report here, which is the variances combined with items that did not get counted. And this report is unique in that the Macola's standard items not counted only works after you post, and you need this ahead of time. And we also have variations of this if you have items that are lotted or items that are serialized, that will show those, those fields as well. Okay, well, we anticipated that this was not going to take the full hour, and hopefully the checklist, we started this checklist a good 30 years ago, and we continue to do it. Each year we go through and try to learn from this. Where did people have problems? Is it caused by our checklist? Should we warn them in the checklist, and so on? So another thing that we didn't talk about at the very beginning was that the items need to be stock controlled and have this inventory transaction box checked. Otherwise, they will not be included. Non-stock, non-controlled items are not included in the batch. So that would be another flaw that they didn't get included. Okay. Well, Martin, I appreciate your attending today, giving up 45 minutes to take a look at this. And if you have any questions, give us a call. Unless you registered in the last half hour or something before the webinar, everybody should have a copy of the checklist. And but if for some reason you didn't get it, feel free to get back to us. Okay. Well, happy counting, happy holidays. We can be helpful, or if you see something on our checklist that is missing or not clear, please give us a call. I noticed something a half an hour ago that needs to get fixed on this, so we're always making some changes. So thanks very much, and we look forward to hearing back from you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.